Okay, first of all, I'd like to start Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the bestower of mercy. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursaleen, Nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. I would like to send my thanks and praise to the Lord of the heavens and the earth, Allah, the creator of the universe, and send salutations upon his noble and last messenger, Muhammad ibn Abdullah. May Allah's peace and blessings be upon him. This recording, I don't want to make it too long, but it is, you could say, a piece of advice, and then secondly, it is a form of a refutation in defense of our noble Prophet Mohammed sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, the first thing I would like to mention is that, unfortunately, what we see today, it's not just related to the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but also in general, you see people crossing lanes, talking about affairs that they are not knowledgeable of. So you'll see people talking about Christianity with ignorance. You'll see people talking about Judaism with ignorance. You'll see people talking about the conscious community with ignorance. And I can bring examples for each one. You'll see people talking about Al-Islam with ignorance. You'll see people talking about certain sciences that they are not qualified to talk about. So my first advice is, please do not cross lanes. Crossing lanes is a very dangerous thing. Now, I'm a Muslim. And when I do study comparative religions, I study different religions. However, when I'm studying, for example, if I'm going to study things from the verses from the Bible, the first thing I do is that I acknowledge that I am not a Christian. So in order for me to understand the Christian scriptures and give it justice, I would have to refer back to the original text. I have to learn the language of the text, which is Hebrew, and the New Testament, Greek. In order for me to understand, I have to go back to the actual language. So I go back to the Hebrew, and I may go back to the Greek. I understand what it says in Hebrew, and I understand what it says in Greek. Then I will go to the exegesis, and I will go to the Christian interpretation of those verses. Once I've got a general understanding, then I will speak. But I will also use my logic. As you know, interpretation is not always correct. And sometimes the verses may not have a literal meaning. It may not have a linguistic meaning, but it will have an implied or metaphorical meaning. So it's very, very important, first of all, to understand not to cross lanes. Don't go to hadith or a verse, an ayah in the Quran, and then say, look, it says this, and then run with it. Please do not do that, because you're doing an injustice not only to the Prophet ﷺ, but you're doing an injustice to the Creator, to God Himself, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're doing an injustice to Christianity. You're doing an injustice to any way of life or any religion or any system, belief system or any ideology without fully understanding. So that's my first advice. Please do not do that. Refer back to the people or the scholars of that science. Get the understanding first and then go. And this is where the likes of certain individuals who are going on the internet and debating, bringing references and thinking that, oh, I've got something here. when you don't have anything. And this is with regards to the hadith when the Jibril came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the angel Gabriel, and he said to the Prophet sallallahu to read Iqra. The Prophet sallallahu said, Ma ana biqari. He said, I cannot read. Then he said, Iqra, and then it goes on and on. And then he would squeeze the Prophet sallallahu, and then he would do it again and again until Jibril actually got his full attention, and then he recited to him. And then it goes on when he went to Khadija and he said, radiallahu anha, and he said that he was frightened. He feared for himself, and then they went to Waraq ibn Nawfal, the cousin of Khadija radiallahu anha, and then Waraq ibn Nawfal, he was a man who had an Arab who had converted to Christianity, and he used to write Hebrew. He was able to write Hebrew, and he would write from the Hebrew, and he would read the Hebrew and learn the gospel. And when the Prophet ﷺ came, obviously he was blind. Waraqah did not see anything from the Prophet ﷺ. So when we're saying how could he say that? How could he say this is the namus which was given to Musa before? Okay? الذي أنزل على موسى من قبل. When he said this, he was not looking at the Prophet ﷺ. He based what the Prophet ﷺ told him about. He based on the knowledge that he has and what he heard from the Prophet. He made that judgment. So it was based on his insight, not his actual vision, but based on the knowledge that he had. He could see, meaning the insight, the knowledge, he could see that this was also a glad tidings of the last messenger who was prophesied in the scriptures before. Okay? So it was based on not his visual sight, but his insight. But I'm surprised he didn't see that. Then Imam al-Bukhari narrates this in several places in his book. So this is an authentic narration. For sure, this is an authentic narration. However, in one place, Imam al-Bukhari adds an extra piece to this story, which is a piece, as the scholars mention, added by Al-Imam al-Zuhri. And Zuhri, whose name was Muhammad ibn Muslim ibn Shihab al-Zuhri. So Imam al-Zuhri was from, he came shortly, not too far after the Prophet ﷺ's time. And he was a famous narrator of hadith. However, in this narration, he mentions that when he added this extra narration, he said, in that which reached us, فِيمَا بَلَغَنَا, in that which reached us. And then he narrates the ziyada, that extra piece of information, which mentions that the Prophet would go, he felt so, he was so, that the revelation, fatar al-wahi, fatratan. So the revelation had stopped for a period of time. Okay, it had stopped for a period of time. And then this caused the Prophet ﷺ to become so sad and displeased that it caused him to go to the mountains on several occasions. And he would كأنه كاد أن يتردى. It was he almost threw himself off the mountain. Okay, he almost threw himself off the mountain. Now there is another narration. So this that narration of Imam al-Zuhri is where all of the narrators, when you see it in other books, okay, Ibn Ishaq mentions this, and other books, other scholars of Sirah, okay, they mention this narration, but it all goes back to Imam al-Zuhri. Okay, so remember this man's name, Al-Imam Az-Zuhri, who said, "Fima balagana," in that which reached us. Okay, and remember that Imam Bukhari mentioned this only once in his book, as a ziyada, as an extra piece of information. Okay, the other times he mentioned this narration of the angel Gabriel coming to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he did not mention this increase, and he mentioned it in different places. Kitab Bad al-Wahi, Kitab al-Ta'bir, and other places he mentioned the same narration but without this extra piece of information. Then there is another narration by Muhammad ibn Umar al-Waqidi, who narrates it all the way to Ibn Abbas. And he mentioned something similar, but actually in this narration it mentions the actual mounting, where it mentions that لما نزل عليه الوحي بحراء مكث أياما لا يرى جبريل فحزن حزنا شديدا حتى كان يغدو إلى ثبير مرة وإلى حراء مرة يريد أن يلقي نفسه منه فبين رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كذلك عامدا لبعض تلك الجبال إلى أن سمع صوتا من السماء. So it's saying that kind of similar, but except this time it mentions that he would go to the Thubair mountain one time, and then another time he would go to the Hira where he got the revelation, and he would want to throw himself off the mountain. So this is the second narration. So there's only two. There's all these other narrations, none of them mention this at all. So imagine there's 10, 11, 12 narrations, 13 narrations. They're all narrating the same narration, and none of them have mentioned any of this. So this is an extra piece of information. And the narration goes on, but the main point here is that Ibn Abbas, it's narrated to Ibn Abbas that he mentions. Now in this narration, which is narrated in Kitab Al-Tabaqat Al-Kubra by Ibn Sa'ad, it is narrated from Ibn Abbas, whereas the one in Bukhari is narrated from Aisha radiallahu anha. So we have Aisha and Ibn Abbas. Aisha being the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, and Ibn Abbas being the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ. Now the scholars mention that this narration from Aisha radiallahu anha, she could not have known this from herself because she wasn't born then. Okay? She wasn't born then. So she couldn't have known this from herself. Abdullah ibn Abbas was a young boy also. So the point here is that the scholars have studied these two narrations. One from Imam al-Zuhri, who narrates it from Qatada, who narrates it from Urwa, who narrates it from Aisha. And the second narration is Muhammad ibn Umar al-Waqidi, who narrates the narration all the way to Abdullah ibn Abbas. And now I'm going to show you. In Islam, in the sciences of hadith, there are three types of hadith. Number one, an authentic hadith, which is narrated by reliable narrators based on their strong memorization and upon their Islamic character. Number two, a Hasan hadith, which is lesser. It's still used, but it's not as strong as... So that all the narrators are good in their Islamic character, but maybe they're not as strong with regards to their memorization of the hadith. Maybe they're not as strong. So that's a Hasan hadith. And there's other reasons why a hadith is called Hasan. Okay. Then you have, so the first two, hadith which is authentic, sahih, that is accepted. Then we have a hadith which is Hasan, that is also accepted, but it's not as strong. Then you have a hadith which is da'if. The third type is a weak narration, which is not accepted. We don't narrate this and use it for rulings in Islam. and we certainly don't narrate this when it comes to describing our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, what type of, this is where some of the people who are crossing lanes and they shouldn't be, this is where they go wrong. This is where they slip up. They're going to a hadith, they're not checking, first of all, the Arabic language, because they don't know it. So they're relying on the English. Okay, fine. Let's just say the English is actually a good translation. The second thing that they should do is check to see whether the narration is authentic or not. Study it. Okay, perhaps because it's found in Sahih al-Bukhari, then you might think, oh, well, if it's in Bukhari, it must mean it's completely authentic. Now, anyone who has studied the sciences of hadith will understand that Imam al-Bukhari's book is split into two sort of categories, usul and furu'. The usul of Bukhari are the foundational hadiths which he uses as evidence. Then you have the furu', which are like the balaghat and that which he narrates ta'liqan. So these narrations are extra pieces of information that Imam al-Bukhari adds to the foundational sort of hadiths which he uses as evidence. So he will mention these foundational hadith first, and then you might find him 2 or 3 narrations down the line, or maybe straight after the hadith he mentions an extra piece of information. Now, not all of those furu', those extra pieces of information, not all of them are necessarily authentic. Okay, so please understand this. If you're going to narrate from Imam al-Bukhari, you need to be careful. Not everything that you read in Bukhari necessarily means straight away it is definitely authentic. You need to look at, is it something that Imam al-Bukhari uses from his usul, or is it from his furu', from those ziyadat, from those extra pieces of information? If it's from those extra pieces of information, then you need to study it. You need to study it first. So when we go back to the narration, this is what the scholars actually say. So Abi Shama, in his book Sharh al-Ahadith al-Muqtafa fi Mab'ath al-Nabi al-Mustafa, he mentions that this narration, that fima balagana, in that which reached us, when the Prophet ﷺ was so upset and so displeased that he went out several times, almost throwing himself from the tops of mountains. Okay. He said, هَذَا مِنْ كَلَامِ الزُّهْرِي. He said, this is not from the speech of the Prophet himself, not from Aisha, who narrated the rest of the hadith before. This is not from Aisha, it's from the speech of Az-Zuhri. Okay. وَلَمْ تَقُلْ عائشة في شيء من هذا الحديث ذلك وأن كانت لم تدرك وقته. So this is not from Aisha because she wasn't born then. She couldn't have narrated that narration because she wasn't born at that time, because the Prophet ﷺ he received the revelation when he was 40 years old. Okay. Then we have the muhaqqiqeen of Al-Sheikh Shu'aib al-Arnaout in their checking of Al-Imam al-Dhahabi's Sir A'lam al-Nubala. He mentions here, Fi awwal al-ta'bir. Now this is a group of scholars of hadith who have checked this narration. What did they say? In the beginning of the book of Ta'bir, وَذَكَرَ فِيهِ هُنَا زِيَادَةٌ لَا تُصِحْ. And it is mentioned here an extra piece of information, an extra narration, an extra part which is not authentic. لأنها من بلاغات الزهري, because it's from the balaghat of Az-Zuhri. It's from those narrations which Imam Az-Zuhri would mention without a chain of narration. He would just say that it reached us. Balaghat means balagani, it reached me, without mention who he had actually heard that from. Okay, and then he goes on and he mentions the narration. Abu Shuhba in volume 1, page 265 to 266 in his book, The Prophet's Story in Light of the Quran and Sunnah, said, وهذه الرواية ليست على شرط الصحيح لأنها من البلاغات. And he mentions that this narration here, it's not on the condition of Imam Bukhari's as-Sahih. It doesn't comply with his conditions of the foundation hadiths which he's put in his book. It's not on the condition of his Sahih, because it's from the balaghat, because it's from those narrations which don't have a chain. وهي من قبيل المنقطع, and it's from those narrations which are broken. والمنقطع من أنواع الضعيف. Munqati' is from the types of weak narrations. Munqati' means the chain has been broken. Imam al-Zuhri could not have heard this from the Prophet ﷺ because he did not lam yudrik waqt al-Nabi ﷺ. He was not there at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. He was not a companion of the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay. Then he goes on. Then we have Imam Ibn Hajar in his explanation, Fath al-Bari, his explanation of the hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari. He explains this hadith. What does he say? He said, ثم إن القائل فيما بلغنا هو الزهري. أو ثم إن القائل فيما بلغنا هو الزهري. So the one who said, in that which reached us, this is the speech of Imam al-Zuhri, not Aisha. Imam al-Zuhri said this. Okay. And then he mentions, وَمَعْنَى الْكَلَامِ أَنَّ فِي جُمْلَةِ مَا وَصَلَ إِلَيْنَا مِنْ خَبْرِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم في هذه القصة. That which reached us from that which was narrated about the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. وَهُوَ مِنْ بَلَاغَاتِ الزُّهْرِ. And it's from the balaghat. It's from those narrations which have no chain. وَلَيْسَ مَوْصُولًا. And it is not connected, meaning that it's broken. The chain is broken. If a chain is broken, if we do not know who the narrators are in that isnad, in that chain, then it is not an authentic chain, because we don't know who else is in that chain. It could be liars. We don't know who's there. It could be people making up the narration. That's in Fath al-Bari. Then we have Sheikh Ibn Hibban said, who was a famous scholar of hadith. He said in his Ta'liqat al-Hisan ala Sahih Ibn Hibban, he says, the hadith is Sahih duna jumlat at-taraddi. He said the hadith is authentic from the beginning up until it says when he went to throw himself off the mountain, at-taraddi. He said that part where he threw himself off the mountain, he was going to throw himself off the mountain, is not authentic. Sheikh Nasir al-Din al-Albani said in his checking of Ta'liqat al-Hisan. So he did the checking for this book of Ibn Hibban, and he added some extra notes. He said, خلافا لما توهمه المعلق على الحديث في طبعة مؤسسة الرسالة، فقد عزاه لجمع ليست هذه الزيادة الواهية عند بعضهم، أحدهم مسلم، ولم يتنبه لها الشيخ أحمد شاكر، فلم يستدركها فأوهم صحتها. So he's saying that Imam Shaykh al-Albani mentions, rahimahullah, that in Sahih Muslim, there's one of the muhaqqiqeen, one of those scholars of hadith who check books of hadith. His name was Ahmad Shakir, and he looked at all these narrations about the same story, and he just said they're all authentic. But he did not pay attention to this increase. So he just said it's all authentic, but he did not pay attention to this increase. So Shaykh al-Albani mentions that. Now Shaykh al-Albani, in another book, in his book In Defense of the Prophetic Hadith and His Life, he said, وَهَكَذَا أَخْرَجَهُ بِهَذِي الزِّيَادَةِ أحمد, okay, وَأَبُو نَعِيم وَالْبَيْهَقِي. So he mentioned, and the other books who have narrated this hadith are Imam Ahmad, Abu Na'im, Al-Bayhaqi, and he mentions different, all of them with this chain of narration from Ma'mar and then from Imam al-Zuhri and so on and so forth. They all mention it with the same sort of a chain. And also, Imam Muslim mentions this hadith. وإنما أحال به على لفظ رواية يونس عن ابن شهاب وليس فيه زيادة. So he mentions, Imam Muslims mention this hadith, but he doesn't mention this extra piece of information. Okay? وكذلك أخرجه البخاري في أول الصحيح. Imam al-Bukhari mentions this also, he mentions this narration in the beginning of his Sahih. Okay? In the beginning of his book of hadith. And عقيل به قلت ونستنتج مما سبق أن لهذه الزيادة علتين. So Imam al-Albani mentions that we can take from this narration, this increase, okay, there are two illas, there are two problems. He said تفرد معمر بها دون يونس. So Ma'mar, he was singled out with this increase, whereas Yunus and Uqayl didn't narrate it. Yunus and Uqayl in Sahih Muslim didn't narrate this increase, whereas Ma'mar did in Bukhari, which makes فهي شاذة الأخرى أنها مرسلة معضلة فإن القائل. So he said that based on this, Ma'mar, this narration is shadha. It opposes the other narrations that are found in the other book, Sahih Muslim. Other narrators did not narrate this increase of Imam al-Zuhri, and therefore the narrator Ma'mar, who narrates it from Zuhri, he is opposing the majority. He's opposing the majority, which makes his narration shadha. And he said, فيما بلغنا إنما هو الزهري كما هو ظاهر من السياق وبذلك جزم الحافظ في الفتح. So Imam al-Albani mentions that this is the speech of Imam al-Zuhri. Okay? And he said Imam Hafiz bin Hajar also declares that as well. And then he goes on. Okay. So Shaykh al-Albani declares this to be not authentic. There's another narration, as we mentioned before, from Ibn Sa'ad in his Tabaqat al-Kubra, from Ibn Abbas. It mentions, now I want to show you here the isnad. It says أخبرنا Muhammad ibn Umar. Now Muhammad ibn Umar here, he is Muhammad ibn Umar al-Waqidi. قال حدثني, he said, Ibrahim ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Musa narrated from Dawud ibn al-Husayn, who narrated it from Abi Ghatfan ibn Turayf, who narrated it from Ibn Abbas, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the revelation came to him, he went to Hira and he stayed there for some days, not seeing Jibril for these days. So he became very, very displeased and sad, until the point it made him go out to the Thubair sometimes, and sometimes to Hira, running to throw himself off the mountain. And then it goes on. That is the point here. So here, what do the scholars, so again, don't cross lanes. We have two narrations, whereas the rest of the narrations, none of them mention this. We have a second narration here. Is it authentic or not? Is it Hasan? Is it Sahih? Or is it Da'if? What do the scholars of Islam, the scholars of the sciences of Hadith say? Do we go to any Tom, Dick and Harry? Or do we go to the people of that fan, the people of that science? And what do they say? To refute this narration, Muhammad ibn Umar, he is al-Waqidi. Ibn Hajar said about Muhammad ibn Umar al-Waqidi, he said, he is matruk ma'a sa'at ilmihi. Okay, he is abandoned. Even though he has a lot of knowledge, he has been abandoned by the scholars. Also, I believe it's Ibn Hajar mentions that the scholars have gathered on the fact that Muhammad ibn Umar al-Waqidi is weak when it comes to narrating hadith. When it comes to general narrating about the Prophet ﷺ, he's good. But when it comes to actual narrating with chains of narration to the Prophet ﷺ, he's actually weak. And you will find these narrations in Lisan al-Mizan and Al-Kashif, Majruhin, Ibn Hibban, Taqrib al-Tahdhib. You can find all of this in these books where it talks about this narrator. Tahdhib al-Kamal and Fath al-Bari. Also, Ash-Sharbini said in his book, The Refutation of Doubt, surrounding the character of the Prophet ﷺ. He said about this hadith of Ibn Abbas, who was the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ. He said that this is from the riwayah of Waqidi. It's from the narration of Al-Waqidi. وهو معروف بالضعف, and he is known to be weak. لا يقبل الجهابذة من المحدثين روايته إلا إذا اعتضدت برواية الثقات. So it mentions that his narrations, the scholars, the great mountains of knowledge, the scholars of hadith, have not accepted his narration unless other reliable sources can strengthen his narration. Okay? And then he goes on and he gives an explanation. So yeah, his point here is that based on Al-Waqidi, the narration is actually weak. Now, he makes another point as well, that the Prophet ﷺ, the scholars make points about these weak narrations. First of all, you have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying in the Quran, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ, and you are upon great character. Great character. It was known, even if you go back to the narration in Sahih al-Bukhari, after the Prophet spoke to Khadija, Khadija radiallahu anha, she praised the Prophet for his great character, how he used to treat his family, how he used to treat the poor, how he used to be with people, how he used to be truthful. He was known as as-Sadiq al-Masduq, the truthful one, and the one who people would believe him when he would say something. So the point here is that the Prophet was known to be of great character before he even became a prophet. The Prophet was known not to drink alcohol. He didn't prostrate to idols. He was of great character, well known for it. So why would a man who was well known, and it was established in the Quran by God himself, by Allah, the creator, the Lord of the heavens and the earth, has established that his character is of high status, of a high level, why would a man who is a prophet of God, a messenger of God, not have the patience to deal with the revelation? That would mean he's not ready to deal with the revelation. Secondly, the scholars also mention that the Prophet dealt with things that were far worse than this. Or most of the Prophet's children died before he even died. Ruqayya, Kulthum, Ibrahim, Al-Qasim, they all died before the Prophet ﷺ died. So the Prophet had to deal with his uncle dying. He had to deal with a lot of death. And then he had to deal with rocks being thrown at his head till his head was bleeding. He had to deal with so many trials and tribulations that were worse than what he experienced, which was only the fact that Jibril the people were not accepting the Risalah, the message in the beginning, except for about 7, some women and some men. Now, the Prophet had to deal with worse than that throughout his whole life. Why is it that it wasn't narrated again throughout his life that he tried to do it again? You don't find anywhere in his life the Prophet ﷺ acting according to like what is mentioned in this increase, this extra piece of information that was added in. Now, some of the scholars mention that Imam al-Bukhari does this deliberately in order to show you that it's not authentic. So when he mentions like one narration and then he mentioned it again in another part, and then he mentions it again in another part, but he mentions some extra information, he does that in order to show you that this extra piece of information is not authentic. And they call this the taqti' of Imam al-Bukhari, which makes it difficult to actually read. That's why it takes scholars to actually read Sahih al-Bukhari. Not anyone can just read it and extract information from it just like that. It's not as simple as that. You need to go back to the scholars, see what it said, go back to the explanation to make sure that you've understood it correctly. And obviously here we can conclude that it is out of character of the Prophet ﷺ. It's not from his character. And as Muslims, what is common knowledge amongst Muslims? We don't narrate this. It's not even known amongst Muslims. If you go to the average Muslim and you say to him the Prophet tried to kill himself and that he was suicidal, no one would believe you, because it's not common knowledge amongst the Muslims. It's not known. Based on that, it means that this narration is not authentic and it's not accepted by the general masses of the Muslims. So we conclude that the two narrations are not authentic. Secondly, it's not from the character of the Prophet ﷺ. Thirdly, it contradicts his general character. It's like having a person who you know to be upright. Think of a friend that you have. Everyone has a friend. Think of a good friend that you have, and you have never experienced any lying. You've never heard them lie. Somebody comes to you and they say, I just met so-and-so and they lied to me 5 times within 10 seconds. They lied to me 5 times within 10 seconds. 5 times. And you've known this person for 10, 15, 20 years. You know them inside out. You know them. Because straight away your reaction's not going to be, I believe that. You're going to say it's out of character, because that's not the character of my friend. He's never lied to me within 20 years of our companionship. These kind of hadiths, when you come across them and they seem a bit funny, please check with the scholars of hadith. Don't cross lanes and same with the Quran. Don't go to the Quran, take an ayah from the Quran, a verse from the Quran, and then say, oh look, it means this, and then you put it on YouTube. Because it's not fair. It's unjust. And it's not fair. It's not fair. So please don't go around saying that how can the Prophet ﷺ is suicidal, when there is no basis for that, because the scholars have declared these narrations to be weak. And I've just explained that, how it was weak. And we can go in deeper about the sciences of hadith, but it will take too long. But it's just a brief explanation of how to deal with hadith. Sometimes a hadith will have an understanding, and sometimes you can take it literally. You have to be careful, because language sometimes you can take it literally based on the linguistic meaning, and sometimes there is metaphor or an implied meaning. This is even in language. Language sometimes is literal and sometimes language is implied. And this is the difference between semantics and pragmatics. The pragmatics deals with the context, whereas the semantics deals with the sentential, linguistic, literal meaning that is extracted from the lexical items that are within the sentence. Okay? So please understand language. Try to learn the Arabic. Secondly, learn the sciences of hadith and the sciences of tafsir, Islamic exegesis, and also refer back to the scholars. If you're not a scholar, refer back to the scholars. Once you've got a general understanding, then you can move forward from there. Thank you. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina